Hello everyone, this is recording number 13 for Plato, a class on the Republic. Today I want to talk about how Plato conceives of the worst person. So we've talked a little bit about how he conceives of those who are best, those who are perfectly just, the philosopher kings and queens in our perfect city. And now the question is, given that he is interested in this full spectrum from best to worst, how does he envisage those who are in the worst condition? Now, I want to propose that there are two accounts of this worst person. In the Republic, one of them is in book 2, so that is fairly early on. And the other one is in books 8 and 9, so that's fairly late in the dialogue. And I want to sort of raise the question of how these two accounts relate to each other. Now, here's the first one. That is in book 2. Socrates speaks of perfect injustice, and he describes this perfect injustice as a kind of skill. He envisages people who always accomplish what they aim for. They can discern what is possible and what isn't possible. And then they only go for the things that they recognize are possible. If something goes wrong, they somehow find a way to make up for it, and they are never found out. So, in effect, they seem just, but they are unjust. And it is this kind of clash between appearance and reality, seeming and being, that Plato flags. Now, we might ask, why is it that those people are the worst, or in the worst condition that a human being can be in? And one way to think about that is indeed this kind of, as it were, metaphysical conflation between seeming and being. They put up this facade of appearance, and behind that, there's this completely different reality of their injustice. Another way to think about what strikes Plato as especially bad here is that those people might seem enviable to some others. After all, they somehow get everything. They get the advantages of appearing just, so they have high social standing, good reputation, and all of that. But they also have all the things that they get by their unjust deeds, which are undetected. So, it can seem that, well, that is from Plato's point of view surely pretty bad. And nevertheless, you might hesitate. You might think, are those really the people who, by Plato's lights, are worst? And why would you hesitate? You might hesitate because it does seem that they need to be somehow in control to keep up appearances. And maybe that control involves a little bit of, something like moderation. And shouldn't that be a good thing? So that leads me to the second account of extreme injustice. And now Socrates talks about unmixed injustice. And he says that no little bit of moderation is mixed into the injustice in that condition. So this is now in this analysis of political decline in books 8 to 9. And we are talking about the person who is in the worst condition. No little bit of moderation, Socrates says again, is mixed into their condition. Instead, they pursue excessive and destructive desires and pleasures. And, when they start out with that, it seems as if this is kind of complete freedom. They pursue anything and everything that comes to mind. But soon enough, it becomes clear that these kinds of desires and pleasures, they rob the person of her agency because they are like the worst kinds of addictions. So it turns out that the person is in fact miserable because she's no longer on top of things. She's no longer fully an agent. She's in the grip of these addictive and destructive desires. And what is striking about this depiction of injustice is that it is pretty obvious this person is miserable. And recall, that is one of the core concerns for Plato, that he wants to show that injustice is not good, but in fact bad for the person who is unjust. Okay, so, I want to end here, but I want to end with a question. How should we think about the relationship between these two accounts of extreme injustice? One option would be that, well, indeed, by Plato's lights, both of these types of unjust people, are really bad. In one case, that would be because of this quasi-metaphysical conflation between appearance and reality, and also because of the seeming seductiveness of, aren't they maybe actually quite well off? And that is really not what Plato wants to say. And in the other case, it would be because of this obvious psychological derailment when people are in the grip of these excessive and addictive pleasures. Another option would be that what we get in books 8 to 9, when we look at the psychological derailment, in fact does supersede the claims that are made in book 2. And that really we are meant to think that what initially seemed to be the worst case, this kind of perfect injustice, was in fact only an interim condition. And that the bit of moderation and control that is still part of the picture here means that it isn't the worst condition for a human being to be in.